Perfect. What's up, everybody? Good evening. This is Katrina from In Cat We Trust, and my channel is dedicated to wrestling and all types of like crazy fun things. But today's a really special episode because I have three fabulous ladies here to kind of celebrate us women for Women's History Month. So we're gonna go, I guess, clockwise. And since Mari, you are the one, like, well, this way towards me, would you introduce yourself to the audience and where you're from and what you do and all that
Hi, everybody. My name is Mari Forth. I am from the Wrestling RHAPup Podcast. Me and my host, co-host Matt Scott, who will probably be in the comments in the chat today. We just, yes, exactly. We bring like the highlights of wrestling from the week for our podcast network, which is generally non-wrestling like fans. So we kind of broaden the horizon for our built-in podcast network, and so we try and make wrestling accessible to anybody like the hardcore fans, the casuals, the people who only listen to us. We try and make wrestling fun, digestible, and accessible. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming on. I actually love that you said it's for everybody. I think that's always with some of the. I feel like we all know how toxic sometimes the wrestling fan base can be, and so it's always nice to know that it is for everybody, not just the hardcore man bros, dude bros, or whatever. So
exactly.
Okay, can you do the intro, please?
Hi, my name is Savannah. I am a writer for Wrestling RHAPup. I've been writing since September of last year, and I mostly cover all the independent. I try to cover all the independent wrestling. Try to give them the spotlight, put the spotlight on all the up and coming stars. Try to stay away from like all the hot takes because that's like emotionally draining. It drains my energy. So like I try to make my writing pieces more positive. But thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be on the show.
Thank you so much for coming on. And last but certainly not least, Lo, can you introduce yourself?
I am Lo. I am the founder and host of Wrestling Winedown. We are a female founded podcast focusing on professional wrestling and wine. We have been around for 2 years now, and we've had just an amazing time collaborating with different female and male creators within the wrestling community, both inside and outside of the ring. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you also for coming on, ladies. You guys are like all amazing in your own right. So let's get right into it. So first question I have for you, ladies, is we've all are wrestling fans, but what was it for you that kind of got you into wrestling where you're like, yeah, this is my jam, this is my cup of tea? What was that for you guys? Whoever wants to take that one first.
I'll jump in. Of course, like everybody else, weren't we all watching during the Attitude Era? You know what I'm saying? I was like 10 at the time, and everybody was talking about it. So of course, I was like, okay, I gotta watch what everybody's talking about. And I tell a really funny story on our podcast. Like, I started watching when the Monday Night Wars happened. I didn't realize it was a Monday Night War. So one day I'd be watching WCW, the next day I'd be watching WWF at the time, and not know there was a difference until I got to school. But that's what initially got me in it. I fell off, like I'm pretty sure most of everybody did, but I got back in it around 2014, 2015, because of one, my now husband, and two, Sasha Banks. So
So when I was little, my uncle was in the WCW and watching Sting. So that's how I started. And then like Mari said, I kind of fell off. And in 2012, while I was in the Navy, I was in the barracks and I was flipping through the TV, and WWE came on, and AJ Lee was on the television screen. So she was one that actually brought me back in. And when they did tribute to the troops in Norfolk, Virginia, that was like my first real live wrestling show as far as WWE. And I got front row, so I had an awesome time, and that's where I'm at now.
So I started watching probably when I was around 9 or 10. I was flipping through the channels at my grandma's house, and I came across John Cena on the Spanish channel. I don't speak Spanish, but I was just captivated. I hadn't seen anything like it before, and then I would go back every week, and I would understand what was going on. I just couldn't understand what like the announcers were saying in Spanish. Eventually found it on the USA Network and just kind of went from there. Was watching SmackDown, ECW, everything that they had to offer. Watched it for a couple years, also fell off, and got back into it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the thing that's really kept me interested, I think, is Bianca Belair. I think she's done such an incredible job, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I wish that we had that type of representation when I would first start watching,
Mhm.
because I think about the black women that we had. All I remember is Crystal. We didn't
Yeah.
have a lot of active female, African American female talent wrestling in the ring. They were utilizing her as a backstage interviewer. So now to see, Bianca, Sasha, Naomi, and even on different wrestling programs, you have Big Swole, you have all these other wrestlers that are doing such incredible work. And you can't forget about the women that came before these women as well, like Jazz and Jacqueline and Alicia
Mhm.
Fox and Cameron. So that's what's kept me interested, is just seeing the growth of the women's division.
Yes.
Yeah. I mine was the I want to say the Attitude Era, but that would be it's a little before because the first wrestler I saw was Shawn Michaels, and he for me was like just everything. When I was like
Yeah.
really young, I had to be maybe 8, 7, 8, maybe 7, and so he was a match, and I was like, oh, who's this guy? He's like super like over the top, and I loved that he was so over the top and kind of made me want to watch. And then there was a little bit of a break because like I started with my grandmother, watching my grandmother as well. She was a really really big fan of Macho Man Randy Savage. That was her guy, and so I watched it with her. And so I want to say the Hardys kind of got me right back in there, like around the Attitude Era. Like I love The Rock, I love Stone Cold Steve Austin, but Jeff Hardy just flipping off shit and just like being crazy. We were like, Matt, at first we're like, I don't know, Jeff got a little extra something, something. And so once that happened, I was like obsessive about wrestling. And then it was Lita who was very tomboyish, and that's kind of how I was as a kid, kind of like, I liked girly things, but I hated dressing like a girl. And so I always was like in the sweats, jeans, trying to kind of be cute, but also like not, let's not do the skirts and everything. And so her Jacqueline were like for me like my women who I like looked up to, and so I feel like I went through that period when we kind of knew like some of the women needed a lot of work, and this is not to like discredit what we know WWE, especially as was at the time for the women, like what they kind of had to work with, but just to see somebody like a Bianca and like how absolutely amazing she is, and to see Sasha being able to dominate where now she's becoming known outside of wrestling, or we
Mhm.
have Naomi who I won't write on that right now, but how they don't do my girl right, and give her credit where it's due. So it's just nice to see that, and even with all the talented women now in the indies, because I do watch, like, try to support the indie wrestling as well, because I have quite a few of that in New York. And so I try to do the same with that as well. And there's just so many different women and so many talented women. And so it's just nice to kind of finally see some badass women just stepping in the fourth circle and doing their thing. So that's kind of for me where it started. So my next question is, what was it for you that made you guys decide to kind of do wrestling content creation, whether that was podcasting or interviews or writing? What was it for you that you're like, you know what, this is something I kind of want to dabble in?
For me, like I said, I'm on the Rob has a podcast network. That's what RHAP stands for. And RHAP did a like a that we called it the class of 2020, and they were looking for more podcasters to join their core of podcasters, especially diverse ones. So again, this is my co-host here, Matt Scott. He's the best. We both came in in class of 2020, we put in an application. There was like hundreds of people who applied, and a few of us got chosen. And so we were a part of class of 2020 for RHAP. We podcast about a whole bunch of things. We podcast about reality TV. We podcast about scripted shows. But then the opportunity came for us to pitch podcasts for the network. And me and Matt got together and we were like, let's pitch a wrestling podcast to Rob. That's our patron saint of podcasting, Rob Sesternino. And we were like, let's pitch a podcast to him because wrestling is kind of like reality TV, like, scripted, it's live, and luckily Rob took a chance on us, gave us our platform, and we've been it's been a little bit over a year now that we've been podcasting under the Wrestling RHAPup. And like I said, his fan base is mostly a reality TV fan base, so like his built-in core podcast audience. So we're bringing wrestling to the audience while also trying to appeal to the outside wrestling fans. So that's what got me into podcasting and content creating. Like once I got my foot in the door, I kind of just pushed it open.
I'm actually in school majoring in journalism. I just so happened to run across a post from Wrestling Republic looking for writers. I had my previous experience, I was a sports editor for my high school. And so I sent in a few practice pieces in and got picked up right away. But what really got me into the media side of wrestling was watching Renee Young, or Renee Paquette now, and Brandy Rose doing backstage segments. And it's like, yeah, I want to do that. So I feel like what I'm doing now is like a stepping stone into like what I want to do in the future.
So I actually started when I was still in college. It was actually my friend and I that decided to enter the world of podcasting. So my friend had posted on Twitter about watching Raw, and I didn't even know that she had liked wrestling. And I was like, "You like wrestling?" And she's like, "Yeah." And we kind of go back and forth just in conversation. And one day we were kind of like, "What if we start a podcast?" And we were very familiar with the fact that wrestling is a male-dominated sport, and there weren't a lot of female voices. So when we were doing our research to start a podcast, it was hard to find anyone to really relate to in that way. So we wanted to be that voice, but we wanted to have something more than just wrestling. My friend liked beer. She was a beer drinker. She loves beer. And I was like, I don't really like beer like that. What about wine? And she was like, okay. And I start thinking, and I randomly had the thought of Wrestling Winedown. SmackDown, you just take Smack out, you add wine in, and the rest is history. It's interesting that Savannah mentioned Renee, because I had the opportunity to listen to her. She came to my college to speak to a podcasting class that I was not in the class. My friend actually told me that Renee was coming to speak, and I was like, I have to be there. I was like, do you know who she is? And she's like, no, I don't know who she is. And I was over the moon. I was like, you have to let me sit in this class. I did, and I learned so much from her and just her experience. And that was around the time that they didn't know where John Moxley was going, and she kind of mentioned that in the class. She didn't mention that he was going to AEW, but I feel like we kind of knew at that point. But I had told her about the podcast. We actually started a month or two right after I met her, and she was like one of the first people that I had told that we were going to do a podcast. So that was pretty exciting to share. And she has been a huge inspiration as well, just because of her work in the WWE. There's been a lot of, strong women that have been interviewers and backstage correspondents. But, the fact that she took that leap and went into commentary when, she wasn't comfortable at all. And I felt like she did such a great job with that, even though there were so many critics that said that, she wasn't good at it. She tried her best, and I think she did an amazing job.
Yeah, Renee's I respect that she's everything she did do before leaving WWE. She always did it with a smile, but she always did tried to make sure she can work and navigate between that. And again, we know how a lot of the male fans are, unfortunately, and so they're a lot more nitpicky when women are doing certain things in wrestling media in general. And so she's one of the few women that we got to see do multiple jobs and, thrive in all of that. So she's definitely somebody who I definitely feel like is kind of inspirational. As far as me doing wrestling content, honestly, it's quarantine. Like, I already had a podcast I was doing because I do fiction writing, and I had another author friend of mine, and we were doing a podcast for like 3 years by this point. And her was like, we're like just chatting like friends, and so to me it's like, oh, we're just having a conversation. It can't be that hard. And then quarantine kind of happened, and I'm like, I don't really like everything. The creativity as far as my fictional writing kind of died around that time, and I'm like, so what else do I like? I like wrestling. I love wrestling. Wrestling kind of kept me going during those months of being kind of stuck at home, just kind of rewatching old stuff. And so I'm like, maybe I'll just do like a podcast and go from there. And so I just asked this wrestler, John Tay, who's an indie wrestler, and I met him in a Jersey show, and I was like, would you want to mind if we can just chat up really quick and have like a podcast or something? He's like, yeah, sure. I was really kind about it. I had no idea what I was doing. I completely just kind of went out there and winged it. And then it kind of went from there. And so me doing that, I got to interview a few people, and then it got me into writing, which I was already doing since I do write. That's like my actual job stuff is I write and ghostwrite for people. And so the wrestling writing, I was like, well, this can't be too far of a stretch when I already ghostwrite for people. So that's not a big deal. And then I wound up now doing with like women's wrestling talk and other things and doing backstage correspondence, what I never would thought I was going to do because I personally hate being in front of a camera. And so, like, I know it seems weird I'm doing a podcast on camera, but I actually hate being on camera. And so it's mostly like I'll do backstage stuff quickly. So now that it's like, oh, I have to now interview people in person, like, you want me to do this and have a personality and okay, and so it kind of went from there. But literally, I always think quarantine. Like, if I didn't do quarantine, if I didn't like kind of step in a couple of times with this other wrestling unpopular review who does wrestling reviews and stuff as well, and they kind of meet another woman who liked wrestling and knew wrestling, and I was like, well, I do know wrestling. I've watched it for a really long time. So I always tell them like they're like the step that I took, and then the whole like, oh, I'm really bored right now, and I need something to kind of get going, and here we are. So that's kind of how, for me, it's not as like nice as you guys. Like when I was looking really hard about it, it was just like, no, I was bored during quarantine. It was like really like, okay, what do I do to kind of just get lose some of what's happening right now?
Yeah.
So we kind of mentioned already some women that in wrestling that we kind of like and inspire, but what are some other like trailblazers or women in the wrestling industry? And this can be like any role that they play that's just you are fans of or you appreciate their work they bring to women's wrestling or women in media.
Yeah, I loved China as a kid as well. Like Trish Stratus, of course, is like my favorite. Just because of the her and Lita era really just kicked a lot off. But like before that, like China and DX was like everything to me because I saw myself in China. You know what I'm saying? Like because I too was like a tomboy and loved sports and all of that. And I just loved how like badass she was and just like she was fighting men, and that was normally me because I was like one of the only girls who liked wrestling when I was younger. So China has always had like a special place in my heart, and she's one of the women I think should be celebrated more, and that it seems like the industry just kind of forgot about and let go when things happened. So I'm a huge China fan. I don't think I would be a wrestling fan if it wasn't for China. So
Yeah, I have to agree. Definitely China for me has been a trailblazer. Going back to AJ Lee, if you read her autobiography, what she did, like she based her character off of like her mental health illness. So, like as somebody that normally deals with like depression and anxiety from the military, like it was something that I could relate to. Um her, and then everything that right now Thunder Rosa is doing, having an all women's wrestling school in Texas. Um it's just been amazing. So yeah, definitely those three.
I would say for me, along with the ones that I already mentioned, two of the ladies that I really enjoyed watching when I first got into wrestling, as well as still keep up with now, are Melina and Victoria. Victoria is kind of now, transitioned into a podcaster. She's kind of in like this retirement phase, but, she's still an active part of the wrestling community. And Melina is still wrestling. She was in the Royal Rumble this year, but those two women were just it for me when I started watching. And I still really, have so much respect for them because, you know, I had the chance to interview Victoria and her character on TV and what she brings to the table, it's very similar. Like she has so much passion, but she's such a sweetheart. And I I will never forget that interview because she was just so kind with her time. And, she's a veteran. And, for Melina is a legend as well. I feel like she hasn't gotten the proper respect within WWE in the last couple years, as well as Victoria. And I'm not really sure of the reasoning behind it or anything like that. But, Melina was one of the first ones when I first started watching wrestling that I felt like had a strong character. Even though she was with these men,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like she could stand alone. And when she transitioned into a singles wrestler, she did such a great job because she already had that character and she had the in-ring skill and ability. And I just always respected her for that. China is another one. Obviously, I got into wrestling a little bit later, so I've had to kind of catch up to really learn about her. But, you know, she stood out among all the men. And again, another woman who I feel like hasn't been given the proper respect that she rightfully deserves by the WWE. I see all the time people saying, give her that solo induction. I mean, I'm waiting on it too. There's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely no
Yep.
reason as to why she hasn't been inducted on her own. Um, I saw a couple of people saying, well, they could add her in at the last minute. And no, you can't. Like, give her the proper, she could headline a class, in my opinion. Um, so adding her at the
Agree.
last minute to this year's, I feel like is extremely disrespectful. Make her have her moment. We've waited for so long. So those women I would say are some of my top ones. And of course, Jazz. Jazz has
Love
had a career
Jazz.
that just spans over for so long and she's still so damn good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and she has that strong character that she's portrayed for so long, but you see her outside of the ring and she's helping train, the future of wrestling with her husband Rodney Mack. And it's like, this woman is clearly dedicated to the sport. I feel like a lot of wrestlers, they get into it not with selfish intent, but they don't think about what they can do to help the next generation. And it's good to see another Black woman who is willing to offer her skills and her time to the next generation of wrestlers that we'll be able to enjoy in the future.
Well said.
I'm gonna, I guess, piggyback off what you actually all three mentioned. China was definitely somebody for me. Um, and I guess after watching that documentary, I felt like I gained even more respect for her than I already had because she was struggling with a lot of stuff and still trying to find her place in wrestling. And like clearly, when all of that crap happened, she lost a piece of herself in that. And so she was always so like amazing to me, especially the whole, even though it wasn't really that long, with the whole team up with Eddie Girl, which I absolutely loved.
Yes.
I thought were like a match made in heaven, like how they kind of just bounced off each other and it worked so well. And just to see her, the fact that she is the only woman in WWE to never actually lose her belt,
Wow.
Somebody like that, and I definitely agree, should definitely be inducted by herself. Like I would argue anybody on that one, like put her in here. There's quite a few two-time Hall of Famers in WWE. She should be able to have, for what she did for women's wrestling by herself and the door she kind of kicked down a bit. She deserves that. I will say Mickie James as well. I feel like she's somebody, I was really fortunate to interview her with Women's Wrestling Talk. And so listening to her, how she started, where it was like she went from like stripping and then she went to like, I got to kind of get my skill sets better and kind of play off of that into wrestling. And then everything she's done so far, and even with doing the NWA Empower pay-per-view and, being able to come back into the Royal Rumble, knowing sometimes that it can be very petty, like very petty sometimes to people that's no longer part of their promotion. And just everything she's done with Impact. I feel like she's somebody who I definitely respected as far as what she's done for wrestling. I would like to add Gail Kim as well. I feel like she's another person people don't really give her. Like, I know she didn't do as much as she probably could have done in WWE, and that's more of a vent type of situation. But I thought she was a phenomenal wrestler. I felt like I wish she would have had a little bit more time to kind of showcase that in WWE. And then also Jess, being able to meet her last year, she's so kind, and I was like fangirl to seeing her in person. I was like, oh my gosh, she's standing right here, like here in front of me. And so I definitely had a moment where I was trying to get myself together because I was technically on a job, but she was so kind and just so wise and so insightful, and I appreciated the advice she gave me. And I was like, I don't wrestle, but just trying to break into doing like more wrestling media type stuff. And so she's somebody who also is just amazing. I thought one of the comments mentioned Medusa, and I got to interview her as well. And I didn't even realize half the kind of crap she dealt with being in wrestling at that time when it was so male dominated, and like she was a different style of wrestler, and why we appreciate that more with the women, where they're more athletic and they're more willing to kind of get banged up and do what needs to be done. You know, WWE didn't really appreciate that style of women back then, as we all know. And so there were definitely women for me that I was just like, thank you guys for kind of just letting people see like women can do just as much as men, if not better than men, or, you know, it's not like it should just be male dominated all the time the way I guess people are expected to be. So my next question then to piggyback off of that would be, what would you guys want to see from women's wrestling like going forward? Like, you know, there are things that are different for the better, but then sometimes there are things you're like, we went like 5 steps back. So what are some things you would like to see as like just going forward as a whole for women's wrestling?
I know I was talking about it just on our podcast this week that luckily we had Lo on as a guest. For like a WrestleMania standpoint and for WWE itself, I really wish that we got way more women's matches, period. Like even though like mostly on WrestleMania is what I should be saying I'm talking about specifically, because right now for the WrestleMania card, the only women's matches are for the belts. You know what I'm saying? It's that's it. It's the two women's championship belts and then the tag belts. And we have all of these men's matches that are complete filler, and half of them I don't even want to see. And you know, and I agree with Rory here, more female driven pay-per-views, exactly that. Like, why are the women only getting enough matches for their belts? Why we had that perfect build up for Naomi versus Sonya and they don't even get a blow off match at WrestleMania? Like, that's what I would like. I think WWE does a great job of showcasing their female talent or women's talent, sorry, during the week, because they have a lot of hours to like kind of spread. But I truly wish that we did have a bigger spot for them on their pay-per-views or their premium live events, you know.
So for me, I wrote a piece a few weeks back. It was an open letter that Brandy Rhodes at. I'm sorry, it's my dog. It was an open piece of Brandy Rhodes about bringing more Black women wrestlers, like signing more Black women wrestlers to AEW. And since then, luckily, I've seen an increase of that. But going back to what Mari said, there was a time where women did have a build up on WWE, and then all of a sudden it just went away. So for me, like, I want to see that come back.
So for me, this one can be a little bit controversial. So, you know, recently and along the years, I've noticed that WWE as well as AEW, they love to focus on the sexualization of women. Like, you know, recently we had the whole thing with, I think it was like Tay Conti's butt. You know, now her whole relationship with Sammy Guevara is in the spotlight and what they decide to do in their private life.
Weird.
Stuff like that, I feel like we need to take out of women's wrestling's scheme of things. You know, I think that the women can tell the stories on their own without having to bring up their attributes or who they decide to be in a relationship with. And this has bothered me for so long because I never understood it. Like, I don't understand why when you have talented women, no matter what, you know, company you're talking about, you need to
Mhm.
bring in stuff that has nothing to do with the wrestling. Or at least if you're telling a compelling story, don't make that the main focus.
Mm.
Um, Something else that I've noticed too actually happened recently on AEW with Vicky Guerrero and Thunder Rosa. The whole comment about, her background, her race, like absolutely unnecessary. That's the stuff that when I watch wrestling, I'm kind of like, okay, we've taken a step back. Like, what are we doing here? And, I see that and it almost reminds me of like 2006 SmackDown when JBL was on commentary and they were letting him say whatever he thought and had no filter whatsoever. And he was racist, he was sexist, he was all these things. And seeing that now we're in 2022, it turns me off completely. Like to use stuff like that in a storyline with these women who are so much better than that. Like that's the stuff that I want to see change because, we have these younger generations coming in watching wrestling, kids or, even people coming back into the sport deciding that they're going to give it another try. And they see these things going on. And whether it's a young child, they might be like, oh, well, what's that about? Or you have an adult who hasn't watched in forever and they're like, well, it's the same thing that happened years ago. Like, why am I still interested in this stuff if they're using these irrelevant topics in these storylines? So those are the things I think I would change.
I do have a question just to like kind of piggyback and ask Lo or the rest of the panel. Like, do you guys think you can do a successful like love story in wrestling nowadays? Like, we just brought up like the Mamacita storyline was China and Eddie. One of the main storylines I really remember was the Lita, Trish, Christian and Jericho storyline back in the day, which was like one of my favorites. Do you think we can get a good love story going, or is that not appropriate for these times?
I mean, I think it's still appropriate. I think it's the way that you go about it. Like with Tay Conti and Sammy Guevara, like I don't watch AEW regularly. I see it on Twitter and I see how people react to stuff. And the whole thing about what they're doing with the belt was just weird to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think you can do a successful storyline with, talents that whether they actually are together or, it's just a storyline. I'm trying to think of one that they've done recently that I was like, they did a good job at that. I think honestly, if they wouldn't have brought up that Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch were together so much, that one could have worked because, they had good chemistry together, but it was the fact that it was always brought up that they're together. Did you know that they're together? That was kind of like, okay, this is a little bit too much. I think actually, you know what? The people that I can think of, they weren't romantic, but they had a good storyline together were Carmella and R-Truth. I felt like they did a good job because they were playful, like it wasn't too much, but they weren't really romantic. So I don't know if you can really count that, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, the Indy and Dexter stuff on NXT was really good. That's really good. Like now it's kind of like getting kind of weird with the whole like Persia and Duke stuff, but I thought that was probably the most compelling love story, the last compelling love story I can actually think of in NXT. Sorry, I just thought I'd ask this.
Oh no. I did like the Indy and Dexter storyline. Like it was like a really awkward pairing, but it worked and it wasn't too over the top where I'm like, why are we seeing this? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting now with Tay and Sammy. And again, I'm a romance writer, so I am all for being happy and being in love, and that is great. However, if you feel the need to like do things with title belts, that is, I don't need to know that personally. Why is that part of now? Why is this now part of the segment? I feel like that's what I was like. All right, guys, like I get like that honeymoon phase. I think we all might have had that at some point where you're like so lovey-dovey and you want everybody to see it, and you would have just posted on social media about how happy and in love with you are, and that's fine. But I just really didn't need to know like whatever happens. Like if that's what you guys truly did, great. I don't personally need to know that. And then I automatically just tuned right off. I'm like, all right, so clearly you don't want my view. And that's like how I see it with that kind of stuff. I feel like it can be done well. Like I said, I love China and Eddie. Like, and they wasn't like really together, but they worked so well that I kind of wanted them to be like, I'm like, oh, I would have loved it. This is a real thing. Like, my little kid self thought this was like everything. And so I feel like if it's done well, it can be done. I just feel like it shouldn't be the basis of the woman's storyline. I feel like whatever Tate's wrestling abilities are is now being overshadowed with the fact that she's dating Sammy. And I feel like it should be, if anything, that should be like a bonus. Like, oh, she's also dating Sammy. That shouldn't be all her gimmick is. I feel like, I will say that I feel like being sexy is not a problem if that's like the gimmick itself. You know, there's a couple of women who kind of have that, where that's like, you know, Scarlett, for instance, who is meant to be like really sexy, and that's fine. But I also think it should not take away from women who are more like, you know, oh my god, what is her name? I'm supposed to bad. I'm forgetting her name right now. In NXT, she's with Natty right now.
Wait,
Shayna Baszler. Totally,
okay. It's like
totally different just now. Like the fact that she's like super badass. So again, you have somebody like Bianca who's able to like pick up Otis with ease and stuff that's literally part of who she is. You can do all of that, and she is still absolutely fabulous when she's doing all these amazing things. She is still Bianca. She's still herself, and I feel like that's what I want to see more. I guess like, just let the women be themselves and stop making it where every storyline is always this really weird catty type thing, or might be that really weird storyline we got with Noemi and Sonya, where it was just I felt a little bit like a racial thing with it. I don't know if it was just me, where I'm like, why is this white woman like acting like Naomi is this evil black angry woman? I really didn't like that. That was the vibe they did with that. And then there has to be no payoff. I really wanted Naomi to kick her. I honestly wanted Naomi to get one good batch in to make up for all the months of that nonsense. So just kind of like, oh, okay. And I'm like, wait, we didn't get a payoff for the nonsense of watching. Like, I kind of got a little bit of PTSD watching her like always attack Naomi for like nothing. And I'm like, so it's not just me that's a little bit upset about this type of storyline, which is just this really weird, shady type, underhanded, catty. I feel like if you want to have a storyline, fine. It shouldn't always be women being catty. That should not be the storyline. It shouldn't be, oh, she's like really, and great, if you got the body for it, sis, work it. I'm all against for body positivity. We can have that as well, but it should not be the main focus of the women on the roster. I feel like that's my biggest thing. And then I will definitely say we definitely need more women pay-per-views. I think Mickie James did an amazing job trying, getting that together, with NWA. Maria Kanellis, when they did the Ring of Honor tournament, was a really solid tournament. I feel like we can get that done. Hopefully, I feel like most people have seen me complain about Tony Khan's dealing with a lot of women on the roster, that he hears something and somebody gets it in his head to like maybe use the women a little better and stop putting them on dark, because some of the matches are great matches, but they're on the YouTube. And again, nothing knock YouTube. YouTube's amazing. But if you want to get the audience who's not your hardcore fan base, then you kind of have to start showing them more on your main show. So Dynamite's your main show. Right. They should be on Dynamite where you can see the women killing it, because there's been some amazing matches, but on the YouTube, somebody might not want to go to YouTube and watch it. Somebody might not want to be that hardcore fan looking at the match. I feel like just give women definitely some more time and let them do what they can do. Like, let's not have it so like old fashioned where it's like, well, let's only cater to the men who, some of the questionable fans who you probably, wrestling's everything to them. And so, they react a certain way, or they are a certain way at events, so they don't know how to deal with a pretty woman, it's like the brain doesn't compute or something when they get around that. And so that's what I personally want to kind of see women's wrestling. Like, we got a lot happening that's good stuff, but sometimes we definitely take those steps back and you're like, this is 2022, guys, get it together. Like, why are we still like doing this again? So I feel like that's my biggest thing. I feel like I want women's wrestling. And so now I want to kind of bring it, because we all kind of like content creator media in some capacity. What do you guys want from women in wrestling media that you want kind of going forward for wrestling as a whole with the women in wrestling media?
Yeah, I think I definitely want another women's because Beth is no longer at NXT anymore, and honestly, I almost forgot about Renee. It feels like it's been so long since they had her on the announce booth, and honestly, to be quite honest, commentary, especially on Raw, is like atrocious. Like the commentary on Raw is really bad. I'm sorry, I do not like the commentary on AEW. It completely takes me out of some of the matches. And then for me, the only commentary team that I like love hands down that I think add to the match right now is SmackDown. I think Pat McAfee and Michael Cole are just doing an excellent job on SmackDown. So if commentary is already bad, I mean, adding a woman is definitely not going to make it worse. So if anything, that would be a great women in media piece. Because I would, of course, more background announcers, more women of color. I love what Samantha Irvin is doing. I love that she's announcing. So maybe I'm thinking too small. Maybe you guys might have some more suggestions.
I definitely want to see more backstage women in AEW. At one
Mm.
point, as far as commentary, they brought Vita Scott in to do the I believe it was the tag team, um, and then she went away. Like I want to see her come back, especially for the Owen Hart, like the women's side of it. I want to see her come back and do commentary. But definitely more women backstage.
I agree. When it comes to WWE, I think that they need to have women on commentary. Like they had
Mhm.
Renee do it, and like I said, if she didn't do that before, she tried her best. I think she did a great job, but
She did good. Mhm.
I'm not sure if there's some apprehension there to bring another woman in, but it's male dominated. Like you
Mhm.
have men everywhere. Like I understand there's veterans, like Michael Cole, who's been there a long time. Great, you could keep him there. And Pat McAfee does an amazing job. But, why not switch Corey Graves out sometimes? Why, I forgot his name. I like Byron Saxton, but why not
Oh
switch
yeah,
him
I
out
like
sometimes?
Byron.
I feel like
Mhm.
we see it sometimes at like WrestleMania and stuff or pay-per-views. They might bring in a woman to do the commentary. And that's great, but why is it only for the bigger events? Why not have it for a week on a weekly basis? There's women's matches on hopefully every show. So why not incorporate a woman to come out and actually do that commentary during that match?
Exactly.
Appeal to that audience that you're trying to reach. Um I also think that WWE, they could bring in more female podcasters. They have Corey Graves' show. I think they work with Ryan Satin on his podcast. I know that he
Mhm.
interviews WWE superstars. We had the New Day for a
The
while
New
with their
Day.
podcast, but like, what woman is on their network? Like, you want to
Mhm.
appeal to your audience, but your audience includes women. I mean, they have the Bella Twins, kind of, but their stuff isn't even branded WWE anymore. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, what are we going to do? Who should we bring in? I mean, my obvious thing would be Bianca Belair, but you could
Mhm.
have Sasha Banks and Bailey get on there. They're
Mm.
actual friends. They could do a podcast. You could have, I don't know,
Mhm.
Samantha Irvin host a podcast and bring women
Yes.
in. I mean, or you could have someone from NXT do it. Beth Phoenix could host it. I mean, I think there's so many possibilities there for them to do something, but I'm not sure if they just don't want to try it out or if they think they don't have the audience for it. But you have all of these women that watch wrestling on a weekly basis, and you give the men stuff to look at, after the show, whether it's a podcast or on the YouTube channel, etc. What about the women?
Mhm. And
Wasn't
also, sorry.
oh
Oh,
sorry.
no, go Savannah. Go Savannah. Yeah, you
Wasn't
go.
Lillian Garcia doing a podcast? Isn't hers attached to
Oh,
WWE?
she was.
She was, but I'm not
Is it
sure if
still
she
doing it?
still does it. I mean,
I
I I
forgot about
I
that
think
one.
the thing with her is that a lot of people had negative thoughts of was that it brought up a lot of people's trauma. That's what I had noticed. People were kind of like, okay, it seems like she's always talking about people's like past trauma, and that rubs people the wrong way. That
Yeah.
I think it's good to have, a show that brings up people's background. If they're comfortable talking about the stuff that they've been through, they should have that platform. But I also feel like they should have something for someone that really does maybe might not want to hear about trauma, or it might trigger them. Have something like a Corey Graves show or like an interview show where they focus on their in-ring work or something like that.
Yeah. New Day did a great job because their podcast was all of it. It was their backgrounds. It was them playing, like they had the tournaments of TV shows. I love the New Day podcast. Like I was definitely following it. But I also thought while you were speaking, Lo, for the women's announcers, remember when Samoa Joe got injured and they put him on commentary while he was injured? Bailey? Like,
Yeah.
they could have had Bailey on commentary like this whole time while she was injured, because there are a select few of those women who do really good on the announcers. I think Becky comes to mind like right away for people who could one day like sit in the commentary booth. Like it's really weird how they don't utilize the women nowhere near the same way as the men.
It's like, and also Paige was doing her Twitch channel, but then WWE came in with that rule saying that they couldn't do it. So now Paige is at home under contract, not doing anything. Why not utilize her for a podcast or commentating and stuff like that?
Great point.
I'm definitely gonna have to. I feel like I don't know if I can add anything else to that because yeah, I feel like you guys covered it all. I loved Bailey anytime she was on commentary, especially with the heel gimmick. It was just like she did it so well, and so I feel like that would have been a great thing. Like if she felt up to it. I know she was like injured and everything. Definitely get her on there. I definitely feel like in general we do need women commentators. I believe there was a clip a few weeks ago on Twitter where the male commentators did kind of really disgusting to the women during the women's match. I don't know if you guys seen that clip that was circulated on Twitter. And I was just like, in 2022, this shouldn't even be necessary to even say during the women's match. Like, why is this where you went with it? And so I feel like you can have women, again, there's plenty of women who do know wrestling. We've been watching wrestling for a long time, so it's not like we're just like trying to wing it on commentary. And maybe there's not too many that know play-by-play, but color commentary is also very important because Hello Pat is amazing, a color commentator. And so you can have women who, unless you get them used to doing play-by-plays, which will be, then it could be a Michael Cole where they can kind of just do that with ease, then train them to do that. Or let them do color commentary, especially when we do have women's matches, where it won't feel like the only thing the commentator's talking about is either disrespecting the women in the ring or making these really weird jokes like it's a throwaway match, or sexualizing them when they're talking more about what they're wearing or what they look like rather than what's happening in the ring. I feel like that's something we definitely need more women, because women understand, like, this is like we're watching wrestling. It's nice that she's pretty and that's great. And, kudos. I am all for people loving themselves and being proud of what they look like, but also that shouldn't be the thing when we're watching them in the ring. It should be like, this is what they're doing in the ring, whatever the storyline is happening between this wrestler, whatever, like do something like that. And so I think we definitely do need more women and more women of color. And I feel like, while, again, not to knock Renee or any of that, but I feel like there's just certain things that women of color may understand to a bit differently when you have other women of color on the roster. And so they get it. Sometimes you just need the person to understand. That will probably even phrase the way a question's asked. Again, if you have the audience of color, like a Black audience, Latino audience, or even more people that's LGBT, where, again, just that there's some kind of correlation to kind of show that wherever, it's something for everybody everywhere. And it shouldn't be like that dangling, like, special attraction once in a while. Like, oh yeah, here's this one time we threw a woman in there, but then we don't see it again for like another year or so. And so I think that's definitely something that should be worked on, hopefully, with not just, the main, I feel like indie promotions too kind of lack with a lot of the women. Like, there's a great amount of women I've seen doing the indie shows, but not enough for me personally. And so, if you guys are listening, wrestling promotions, please get on that, just putting more women of color, more women in general back there backstage, and letting them show what we can do. Because, again, there is a lot of women wrestling fans, more than I think people realize that they are. Right. And it should also show not just in the wrestling, but all the little facts, like the referees. I'm glad we're getting more women referees, which I think is amazing. We're starting to see more women, do that. And so we need to keep just adding that, in the media, in the podcasting, when they do those documentaries and you see people pop up. Like, it was nice to see Denise on the WWE Evo. If anybody was watching the documentary, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I know who she is. It's nice to see somebody pop up. Like, see, women do know wrestling too, and so more of that. So I guess my final question for you guys is more so. I feel like, again, this is Women's History Month, and I'm all for, like, sometimes you gotta hype ourselves up and stuff. So who are some women you kind of want to shout out for Women's History Month, but also something that you have done personally that you just want to kind of toot your horn a bit, kind of just brag a little bit. It's okay to toot our horn sometimes, and so shout somebody out, and then kind of just something that you're really proud of that you're doing for your podcast or for your content.
Yeah, it's funny. Denise Salcido was the person I was going to say that I really respect everything that she's doing in and around the wrestling community right now. Like, when she popped up, I was like, oh snap, she's one of the people that she's a great follow. I think she is very outspoken and she deserves all of her props. For me, tooting my own horn, I guess, like I said, for our podcast, we really want to create an inclusive space. Like, my co-host is a queer Black man. I am a Black woman. We want to make sure that wrestling is inclusive for everybody. We try and get as many guests on with different backgrounds, with different wrestling levels of wrestling knowledge, to make it really inclusive, because that's one thing. Like, nobody wants to try and jump into something, especially something that is really good and runs the gamut. Like, there's wrestling out there for everybody, and nobody wants to try and jump in and then immediately be like, oh, you're watching the wrong stuff, or, oh, can you name this many people? Like, you don't gatekeeping. We don't like gatekeeping. So the aim for our podcast and what we truly want to do is make wrestling accessible, expose people to wrestling. We got a lot of emails from people saying that we had reintroduced them to wrestling. So ditto, Matt. So it really is. It feels like we're trying to just make people comfortable, because that's all you want to do. You want to make people comfortable when they're exploring new things, or even when they're hardcore veterans. Like, I've said it before. I feel so ostracized from certain sections of the wrestling fandom that it's just like, if you're not going to accept me, we'll just make our own space, in a sense. So that's what we want to do. We want to we've been making our own space, and we've been getting really good feedback, but our goal is to just get bigger and bigger. We want more people. We want more people to come in. We want more community and all of that.
If I could hype a couple of people, media side, definitely Sam Laterna. I've been keeping a close eye on her. I actually reached out to her a few weeks ago, wanting to shadow her, seeing what she does backstage, because I think what she does up north is awesome. Um, Wrestling wise, there's a awesome women out in the indies. The two that I want to shout out, that were actually from my area at one point. Sahara Seven, that's been on AEW
Oh.
Dark a few
Mm-hmm.
times, and Erica Lee. She was the only female that was in the Super 8. She does an awesome job all around. I want to give those two their flowers. Um, and then I guess to toot my own horn, I think I'm doing a good job, like I said before, like putting the spotlight on these indie wrestlers that are trying to make a name for themselves, especially the touching on diversity. As far as the LGBTQ community, what I've done was, there's actually a show coming up in June called Pride and Vibe that's being ran by Billy Dixon. It's the first ever wrestling weekend event. So I feel like I've been doing a good job hyping that up. Um, it's nice, and it's nice to see something like that. And just continuing to highlight the diversity, and just trying to trying to bring positivity into this community.
So the couple women I want to shout out, I'll start with Karen Peterson. She is a writer at Post Wrestling. She writes about stardom. She's also, been a huge influence in, helping Japanese fans, Japanese speaking fans and English speaking fans be able to, communicate with each other in a productive manner. I had her on my show recently and I learned a lot from her about Joshi. And I feel like a lot of people want to get involved with watching Joshi, but they don't know where to start. And she did a great job of just kind of laying everything out. And she's been very enjoyable to watch her stuff on Twitter as well as read her articles. And she's completely fluent in Japanese. And I think that's just so incredible, and it's such a skill to have in our community. Seeing different people that have these different backgrounds and speak these different languages, so they're able to reach a bigger fan base that someone like myself who only speaks English wouldn't be able to reach. So she's one. Also want to shout out Iridian Fierro and Teddy Chavez of the Rest Friends podcast. They're based out of Chicago. They are cousins. They host a podcast, but they do an incredible job at their coverage, whether it's through the podcast or YouTube or social media. So they do a good job as well. Also want to shout out Nakamura or Nicole. She's a graphic designer who has designed or illustrated some of the top female talents of today as well as in the past. And I think she's currently having a sale on her stickers, so go get those. Also want to shout out Brittany Sacco, who is a wrestling cosplayer here in Las Vegas, as well as Casey Lindo, who is a cosplayer as well. These people have some patience. I got to tell you that, because the way that they put these outfits together, and they're very intricate when it comes to detail. Like, I could never, like, just put me in a wrestling shirt and have me at the event. They put in so much time and effort into these outfits, and it shows. Specifically Casey, like, she does such an amazing job at finding all of these different treasures to add to her collection to make these looks. Like, the ones that I can think of off the top of my head, she did the Fiend Bray Wyatt. She's done the Undertaker. She's done Ronda Rousey, or Roddy Piper as well. But she's just so incredible at it. Like, the patience that I do not have, she has. Someone else that's doing a really good job is Santana at Women's Wrestling Talk. She's the editor-in-chief over there. I keep up with her, and she just is so passionate. And she does, such incredible work with her writing, and it's been really enjoyable, as well as the rest of the Women's Wrestling Talk staff. Katrina is also a part of that. But to see a collection of women from all different backgrounds, different races, bring so much to the table is something that truly makes me proud. The last outlet that I can really think of that had like a strong background like that is Diva Dirt, and that was a long time ago. They're still up and running, but we don't really hear about Diva Dirt anymore. But to see Women's Wrestling Talk, take over and, produce so much content, whether you're on YouTube, you have articles on the website, you're doing these interviews. It's just incredible to see the amount of people that are on the staff that are just knowledgeable and hungry to learn more about the wrestling world. And I'm just so excited to see what else is to come for you guys.
Did you want to just put something out about yourself that you just want to shout it
out? We are nearing 3 years. We will be at 3 years in the middle of April. So that's an accomplishment that, has been on my mind recently. Like I mentioned, when I first started the podcast, it was me and my friend. She stepped away about almost a year ago. So I've been, running everything. But, I have women, an all women team as well, like my photographer. I have a graphic designer, that's something that I'm proud of, that I've been able to, have a diverse team of POC women at that, that have been able to help my vision come to life, because I couldn't do this on my own. But, some other things that I'm really proud of are the interviews that I've done and the people that I've been able to connect with and grow friendships with. Just going back and looking at the episodes that I've recorded, sometimes I'm like, I have imposter syndrome, because it's like, I've interviewed this person and they've done this and they've done that and they were on Wrestling Winedown. Like sometimes it's hard for me to process it all, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I'm very proud of the work that I've been able to publish, and the people that have listened to it, as well as the people that have followed along the journey of Wrestling Winedown.
Absolutely, like I just for all three of you guys, as I've been seeing, your stuff on social media, you guys are like absolutely killing it, and you guys are amazing, and so that's why I just kind of wanted to, like, it's like we can be humble, but it's okay to be like, listen, I know I did that, it's perfectly fine to kind of do that sometimes, and so that's why I wanted to give you guys the floor for that. I guess for me, as far as people, just kind of quick shout out. Viva Van, who's the indie wrestler over on Cali, absolutely an amazing wrestler. She has like I think 5 or 6 belts happening right now. I just call her like Queen of Belts. She's absolutely coming, absolutely amazing. I also Rain Cruz, who happened to be the SummerSlam announcer for the Big E match last year. She's just kind of getting herself like really out there, and I'm actually was really fortunate to be able to talk and interview with her. But she's also a really like such a sweetheart, and so like. Shout out to her. I also wanted to shout out Shayna, who's part of Unpopular Review. She usually covers NXT. And she's also, again, kind of recent with this, but absolutely kills it. Absolutely very knowledgeable, especially about NXT. Shantice, who is part of Talk of Champions. That is my girl. But also, her knowledge, especially of Black wrestling history, is so extensive. And I don't think people realize like the amount of work and effort she puts into getting that information out there, and just letting people know that, listen, it's not just like we love the Black people we know about, but there's so many Black wrestlers that a lot of people don't know about. And so she puts so much work and effort into doing that. And so shout out to her. Also Kiki, who also is a writer, but she also does color commentary. And again, we were mentioning about having more women of color, but more women in general just doing commentating and doing it well. And that's something she really does. Also, TK, Women's Wrestling Talk, and I tell her this all the time. She took a chance on a person who, again, I said in my podcasting off, being bored during quarantine. I didn't know what it was going to do, where it was going to go in 2020. And she took a chance off of one interview when I was like, okay, I'm not really like known. I'm little fish in like a really big pond. And she was always really kind, and she's always like looking out. And she's the reason I got to interview people like Medusa and Mickie James and Tasha Steelz. And just like, I'm always just so grateful because that one yes opened so many other doors for me to do the stuff that I'm doing now. And so just wanted to shout those ladies out. As far as me, I just feel like I don't want to toot it too much. Just mostly, I'm always just, I feel like my personality mostly has allowed me to be friends and make a lot of friends in the wrestling that I didn't have a year ago. And that's so important, just to have like your tribe, like you don't always got to get along with everybody in the tribe, and that's perfectly fine. But again, wrestling can be very ostracizing at times. Most people who don't understand wrestling already have these views of wrestling fans as it is. And then we're also women of color in wrestling, and that's a whole nother set of hurdles we have to get through. And so just the friendships I made and the networking opportunities I've been able, that's just something that I'm really proud of, because I'm how I am. A bit, a bit sarcastic sometimes. I might talk a little shit on things I do, but it's kind of what you see is what you get. This is who I am. And so I feel like that's just something that has made it very open, I guess, so honest for me to kind of just get some people in there. So that's all I'm going to do, just quickly to toot my horn. So you guys tell the audience where they can find you on social media. Start with you, Mari.
Okay, you can always find me on Twitter at Mari Talks Too Much. That's 2 like the number 2. You can also follow the Wrestling RHAPup's Twitter account. That's at Wrestling RHAPup. That's RHAPup. Also, please subscribe. Go to robhasawebsite.com/wrestling feed in order to subscribe to like Apple, Spotify, all of that. And that's where you can find us. We also do our podcast via like video podcast. So if you want to check that out, you can go to Rob Has a Podcast on YouTube, and we're on the Rob Has a Podcast YouTube page. Just search Wrestling RHAPup Podcast. Yeah, that's it.
I am mostly on Twitter at Savannah RG513. You can also follow some of my stories on at Wrestling Republic and WrestlingRepublic.com. So that's where I'm at mostly.
Thank you for having me on this panel. It's been amazing to talk with you ladies. You can find Wrestling Winedown anywhere you listen to your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WWDCAST. We are moving our merch, all of our merch, over to spring. So we will relaunch all of our Wine 316 merch soon. Right now, we have up our wrestling black wrestling queen shirt that is up on our Twitter. 25% of the profits will be going back to Girl Wonder. They do some amazing work with some younger African American youth women that are looking to go into like television and media. So 25% of the profits will go back to them. That shirt is on sale right now. It will be off sale in a couple weeks, but thank you so much again. I've enjoyed being here.
Again, I wanted to thank all three of you guys. Really insightful. This is a really great conversation, and I hope we can make this happen again soon to get up there and whatever it is, I figure it out. But I would love to have you guys back on this chat. As far as me, I am literally pretty much everywhere on NCAT We Trust. If you're on Twitter and Instagram, the E is a 3. And I also write for quite a few sites, being Women's Wrestling Talk as well. I'm also on YouTube and on TikTok. If you like that kind of thing, I kind of jumped in there a little bit with that WWE contest, trying to see if I was going to make it. I don't think I did, but the point was it was a fun kind of experience to kind of do. And so that's where you can find me. Again, thank you so much, ladies, for spending an hour with me on this lovely Wednesday and kind of close out Women's History Month. And I will have all the links to the social medias in the description once this video goes off air. Thank you guys so much for hanging in the comments. Matt, I know you was in here a lot. Thank you so much for supporting Mari and supporting the rest of us. Rory, thank you so much for coming in as well. And until next time, guys, I will catch you later. Bye.